Boys, episode 3 of season 2. Here we are. How you doing, Connor?
I'm good. I am good. I know you might have a little bit of mic trouble. You might want to speak up a little bit, just so you know, just for future reference here. But,
Alright, sounds good. Alright, I do have a little bit of mic trouble today. My stand and everything. So
we'll be alright.
I'll make sure I speak up a little bit.
We'll be alright.
Yeah. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. It's been a week, I guess. How long has it been? A little over a week since we've done this.
Yeah. Well, last week we had that article that you were working on. Luckily, we got that out. Got some good feedback. I don't know.
Yeah.
What did you think of it?
Yeah, it's been good. I was hoping to get a little bit more feedback, I guess, on it, but it's all been kind of positive, which I'm okay with. But I don't know. I was hoping to get some thoughts on it. I'm sure there's some stuff I got wrong, maybe, but in general, since this is what the podcast is about, there's a book, and I'll pull that up, called Complex Social Networks that I found was recommended by Dr. Wright, and I ordered it. It's about like $45 on Amazon, so I kind of took that plunge, not knowing how it would go, and I'll be like 100% honest, I almost put it down a couple times because I thought it was a little too dense. It was pretty mathematically dense, and I don't know. I knew there was definitely probably 25% of the book mathematically that I had to take the author's word for because I couldn't really verify it myself. Just not that advanced mathematically there. But here, sorry, I'll switch I gotta remember to switch the video over to. We gotta figure that. We gotta get a little better solution for that going too.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the book itself, it's on Amazon. We'll post a link down low. But so, book was really interesting. I guess before we get into the book, let's maybe plug. We wanted to plug Crypt Arctica because we feel really bad. We have yet to plug them yet. And Corey, I'll go ahead and share my screen here so you can see. But whoa. So here's the book that we're talking about, but we'll go ahead and come over. Crypt Arctica. So we apologize to them in advance. Really pretty crappy of us. We haven't mentioned them because they've been around for a long time here. They just offer merchandise and take Bitcoin Cash. So you can buy t-shirts, hoodies, mugs. Looks like you can even buy some of Satoshi Doodle stuff, which is pretty cool, or maybe just one of them. But then a few other prints here. So yeah, that's pretty sweet. I like that. And I think even at one time, Raina was selling a t-shirt on here. Yep, there it is. She drew that shirt, so that's pretty cool. Yeah, so we'll give them a shout out here. Sorry guys, because we we did not mention them all, which is not very cool of us. So
hard to keep up too.
I know, there's just so much stuff. Yeah. But so anyway,
go buy some merchandise.
Definitely check them out. Okay. Yeah. There's also, I was hoping I mentioned. We'll say thanks in advance. I guess I'll wear it Wednesday when we have our interview with a special guest. I don't jinx it, but looking forward to that interview. The Kryptonized.it people sent us t-shirts, which is just really cool of them. So. Spend and replace t-shirts because they just went live with the spend and replace thing. If you check that out, so basically you can spend Bitcoin Cash, and automatically you'll buy the same amount of Bitcoin Cash that you just spent. So it lets you get all the benefits of using Bitcoin Cash, whether that's in discounts or just in a better commerce experience, and then you can also top off your Bitcoin Cash. So
it's gonna be super convenient because every time I use my Bitcoin Cash to buy stuff, it's always like then I got to go back to Coinbase, buy more, and then I end up questioning myself like, oh, hey, well, maybe I'll try and play the trades a little bit, like, will the price go down? Maybe I can save a couple dollars, and then it goes up, and then I screw myself.
Yeah.
This kind of relieves that stress. You just buy something and then replaces it right away. It eliminates that step for trading concerns.
Definitely. And between Kryptonize, Purse, Crypt Arctica, really, the spend and replace feature is going to come in handy. And it's been replaced zero confirmation, or the CashPay wallet itself. It's really sleek. It's got zero confirmation and just a good UI. It's a fork of the CoPay wallet, so it's good. Is there anything else? I don't think there's anything else. I guess there's a few news things we can just talk about, right? I mean, something I found pretty interesting. CoinGeek, their mining shares finally. I think they might right now be the highest. It's been fluctuating day by day, but they were the highest at one point yesterday, I think. But
I think for like a moment they were, but I think they're second right now, like more consistently, I believe.
Yeah, so that's kind of exciting, right? They're living up to their promise. Calvin said it took them longer than they expected, but they're doing it. They weren't lying, so
proof of work.
Oh yeah, yep.
Proof of work.
All right, you want to hop in?
I got an event tomorrow that I'll be at, representing Bitcoin.com, and I'll be at the crypto finance capital of the world with Larry Sharp tomorrow in New York. And that's at Galvanized. Let's see. I think the name of it's Galvanized. If you go to my meetup page, you can find it. Bitcoin Cash New York meetup page. But we're teaming up with Startup Cities Crypto, and Larry Sharp, the Libertarian candidate running for governor of New York. Apparently, he's a big cryptocurrency guy, so I'm kind of interested to see what he says. I think they're specifically going to talk a lot about the bit license, the New York bit license that came into effect back in 2015.
Interesting.
So it'll be kind of interesting to see, I don't know, kind of the middle ground between government and cryptocurrencies. I'm kind of interested, too, to see the presence of Bitcoin Cash there as well, just outside of cryptocurrencies,
Sure.
The event you could actually pay for with Bitcoin Cash.
Sweet.
And Bitcoin.com is going to be there, so it'll be a fun little night. I'm interested to learn a little bit more about what this guy has to offer for my voting purposes.
Yeah, that's sweet.
But yeah, I mean, definitely awesome to see libertarians jumping behind the cryptocurrency realm. Hopefully they start to hone in on Bitcoin Cash.
Yeah.
Which I think they should, but maybe I'll be able to convince them tomorrow too. We'll see.
Good.
But,
sweet.
Yeah. So that'll be tomorrow night. Well, Tuesday night, July 10th at 6:30. So if you're around New York, definitely come out, stop by the Bitcoin.com stand, say hello.
Sweet.
All right. Well,
should we dive in?
Get into the the educational content for today.
All right. So yeah, I guess we'll put a link to the book here if anyone's interested, but I will give a forewarning that it's pretty dense.
I actually got mine last week.
Nice.
Just started going through it a little bit more, but I'm basically trying to pull all the things that you're saying here to match it up. Yeah,
you can verify me. Well, so the main thing that I think is just really interesting from a high level, like before we jump in, is that what I noticed as I was reading the book. So the book itself is just about social networks in general, right? So you can think like in the modern day, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff, right? Kind of it explores how the internet has evolved, which is a pretty new thing. Like people haven't really been mapping that stuff out until very recently, So what I found pretty interesting is that as I was going through all these different types of networks and all the research that had been done to analyze social networks themselves, there was the theoretical basis of, okay, well, here's what we think would happen or should happen, and then there maybe be sprinkled throughout case studies where it said, researchers found that in this case this happened, right? What I found reading the book is that it seemed like every single time they would list a shortcoming in a network, it would then, in my own head, it would be like, oh, well, that shortcoming is solved in Bitcoin. Actually, Bitcoin itself has economic incentives that for example, if a network needed to be highly interconnected all the time, 24/7, that was listed in the book as a shortcoming, right? Because not all networks are 24/7 highly interconnected all the time, right? But in Bitcoin, obviously, for miners, there's that economic incentive to, okay, well, this is off, then I'm losing money, right? So, whereas if you're running like let's take Satoshi's example, right? A Usenet node from way back when, there's not really an incentive for you to always keep that thing on, right? So I guess that was my disclaimer. That's what really got me like, okay, wow, I felt kind of an urge to try to break that down in some capacity. So we wrote it out, and I guess we'll give Christopher Ames a call out because he helped edit it and made it like 10 times more readable. So I really appreciate that because it definitely needed some help. So I'll give him a call out because that was really helpful.
Some of this stuff is just so complex. Like, you have to make sure that you, like, it may make sense to you in the way that you're typing it out, but, like, sometimes to the average normal reader, it's just, like, light years beyond, it's hard. So it's definitely great to have other eyes look at it.
Yeah.
Kind of, I don't know, maybe make it more, like, PG rated or something.
And we are, I'm not a writer, that's for sure, so.
Yeah.
I didn't think I was a podcaster either, so, but whatever.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess we can kind of just go through it little by little here. But the thing I started out talking about was like, if you take, for example, what I thought was just interesting to think about, because in the Bitcoin debate, right, it started with, or I guess recently you have this whole, okay, well, nodes are what matter, right? So in the BTC side of things, it's, well, everyone needs to run a node, and the more nodes there are, the more decentralized the network is. In fact, I bet that if you asked anybody in the BTC side, is the network more decentralized if everybody runs a node, they would say yes. What's the most fascinating thing about that is that there's like no root, that's not rooted in any kind of academic sense of the word decentralization. So decentralization itself has always referred to the number of the interconnectivity of the network, right? Which, I mean, take everything else away from it, that's kind of weird, right? It's kind of weird that no one talks about that no one brings it up. Like Dr. Wright has been all about it, like, repeatedly, and it's kind of it's just leveraged against him as some kind of attack. But I verified that if you go and look at any kind of scholarly paper, anything like that, decentralization always means the interconnectivity of the network, the number of edges specifically in the network, the number of links between nodes in the network. So it has absolutely nothing to do with the number of nodes in the network. And that basic idea, right, is what separates the BTC scaling map and the Bitcoin BCH scaling map, right?
Right.
So I thought it would be, when I was first sitting down to write it, I was at just a bar at a hotel, and it kind of made me think, right? I mean, when you if you tweet something out, right? If you send a tweet out, the number of like nodes that come, if you think of every Twitter profile as a node in a network, the number of nodes that you touch don't actually matter, right? So if I reach 1,000 nodes on one day, and I reach 1,000 nodes on another day, I could have two very different outcomes depending on the interconnectivity of the nodes that I'm reaching, right? So, in the thing, the example given is like Kanye West and Donald Trump, right? If Kanye West and Donald Trump see and retweet something, it has a lot more distribution power than like if we did that, right?
Right.
So I mean, really, in the case of like a network, if you want to maximize the reach of something, all you really care about is, okay, well, how connected are the nodes in the network? Because if I want to get this information across the United States, for example, the then I really care about, well, I want to reach the nodes in the network that are very highly connected so that that information can spread, right? Mm-hmm. So, decentralization, the number of links between nodes is what matters if you want information to spread across a network. That would really be at the root of what decentralization is, right? So kind of to take that maybe into what the, not argument, I guess, but where Bitcoin picks up is obviously, again, this is again really something that Dr. Wright has been all about, is the small world network, right? So he says Bitcoin itself is a small world network. Even at the Deconomy conference, he was pretty much like the only guy up there talking about this, right? Which still kind of blows my mind. I mean, does that not blow your mind, like, that no one talks about this at all? Like,
well, it kind of blows my mind in terms of blockchain. Everyone talks about blockchain technology, and they leave out the aspects of how the network is actually created. You know, like yep. Everyone, it's almost a assumed aspect of blockchain. Like, this is how it works, and it's a mesh network, and it's decentralized because everyone has the possibility of running a full node or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a misconception that everyone has based on the internet protocol maybe that we've seen today, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think everyone's like missing out the actual like evolutionary aspect of the network. Like, the network is what's being built on top of this. Like, we're not just taking a protocol that we have right now and adding a currency to it. It's the evolution of a stronger network, which a currency is built on top of.
Yeah. And more ironically, they use the comparison of the internet to then argue for layer 2, right? So it's almost like it needs to be this mesh network. Otherwise, how can you justify the layer 2, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So,
but I mean, but again, like, their assumptions of that are based on historical evidence that we've seen before, you know.
Yeah.
But you can't necessarily blame them. Well, I don't know. Can't necessarily blame them for that, but I think a lot of people are just missing the picture here.
Sure.
You know,
sure.
They completely underestimate what's actually happening in the background here. I don't know. It's definitely going to be interesting to see how this all pans out and what the different networks of each blockchain, kind of how they survive.
And to be very clear, because I should get this out of the way, I didn't make this very clear in the article because, well, okay. Number one, you can go on nChain's website and actually read the paper that Dr. Wright and Dr. Havarone, Marco Havarone is his name. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. They did a paper together examining with real world data the Bitcoin network, right? And to be very, 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 very clear, they're pretty conclusive that it is a small world network. So everything we're about to say, I think that you can actually deduce that Bitcoin is a small world network just from like a logical deduction and just kind of first principles. But to get it out of the way, that it's not really like, I won't say it's not up for debate. Like, I don't think anything's not for debate, but it's pretty much they found that I'll pull up the paper in a little bit, but
can we pull up the graphics actually right now? I think this might be a good time for those graphics because I feel like I'm saying some stuff that might not necessarily make sense for a viewer right now or a listener.
Yeah.
I feel like
so
kind of not how the edges work and how the mesh network works. I think these graphics are freaking awesome.
Let's here. I'm gonna share my screen with you here. Yeah. All right. So yeah. All right. This works. Let's start here. All right. So this is all, again, credit kind of goes here to nChain. So this is a PowerPoint I had put together. But what we can do here is just show some of these graphics that kind of get away how this works. So we'll start here and just say this is really how it works, and this is actually modeled off of data. So if I hit play here, what this is showing is actually miners themselves connecting to each other in the network. So all these nodes themselves are miners, and you can just kind of think of this as, well, I'm a miner, I'm going to make a connection to a new miner, and over time, what ends up happening is, via the use of incentives,
right.
I'm going to make sure...
What's important here is that there's time is passing by and more information, and miners have to be on top of their game in order to know if a block's been mined. That's where the incentive aspect comes in. And I think that's why you have all these nodes building more and more connectivity to each other.
Yep, exactly. And I think anyone can kind of start to mimic this behavior. If you run a node at home and you're kind of curious, I want to monitor. It's really fun to play with. If you have a node at home, you can run the network and you can see for yourself. If you just connect to 8 random nodes and you send a transaction and you query your mempool, you might not see it. You might not see it for quite a little bit of time. But that's because the 8 nodes you're connected to, you have no idea who they are. They might not be miners or anything like that. And so what you generally end up doing, like myself, is you find, okay, well, I'm going to find all the network nodes. I'm going to find all the miners, and I'm going to add them as a peer. And as soon as you start doing that, you kind of understand the incentive to do so, because you can send a transaction and see it within, a quarter of a second, right? And so obviously this kind of shows what ends up happening is you end up with this densely connected cluster, right? And I don't actually fully understand what this is. I'll have to check on that. But to make this even more interesting, let's say a block is found, right? And these are all maybe nodes in the network. A block is found, and it gets rapidly propagated to the network. Or even this probably holds true for even just a transaction, right? And so you end up finding out is that, okay, well, all the miners here have the block or they have the transaction, okay? Mm-hmm. All these nodes on the outside, those are all those Raspberry Pi validating nodes that everyone talks about, right?
Right.
So, and this is a node, if you've downloaded Bitcoin ABC, Bitcoin XT, and you don't mess with any of the peer connections, this is what your node is pretty much doing. It's maybe one of the last ones to find anything that happens. And that's, again, because if I'm a miner, there's really no reason for me to connect to you. But there is a reason for me to connect to everybody else, because if a block is found, I want to know that immediately so that I can start building on top of that block. Every second that I'm not doing the most efficient thing, I'm losing money. So again, it's really just incentives. So let me pull this away here. And I'm going to give us a little mirror thing again.
You're literally pulling it away.
Let's see. Here we go. All right. So I thought we could just kind of go through some of the images. And again, Christopher Ames made this a lot more understandable. So imagine that you live in a cul-de-sac, right? And your houses are all connected by a telephone line. And Corey, let's say you live here in this blue house, and I live over here in this green and orange house, right?
Okay.
If you want to get a message to me, all you have are the blue telephone lines to get the message to me. So let's say you say, "Hi, Connor," and you send that in a little message. It'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hops until it gets to me. Okay?
Yep.
This is really just a one-dimensional mesh network, right? There's just really one degree of freedom, and you're going to go across, and you really have no other way to get that message to me except for this one route, right? So if we come down, you can kind of extrapolate this to, let's say you have a ring. So now you have a ringed network, okay? Similar to the cul-de-sac we just looked at, but you can see maybe you have a few more connections. So maybe I'm connected to the neighbor right next to myself. I'm connected to their neighbor over here, and I'll do the same on the other side. So I have about 4 connections per node here. If I want to get a message from node 1 over here to node 17, I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 hops instead of quite a bit more if I didn't have kind of those extra connections involved. Mm-hmm. So the term of a small world network was first created by this guy, Stanley Milgram. He's the guy who did the Milgram experiment, and really he coined the term small world, and it specifically, according to Vega Redondo, the guy who wrote this book complex social networks. He said it describes a situation where despite facing a very large population, an individual can typically succeed in contacting any other in the population through a short path of intermediaries. And the reason why that's important is that the way he found that out was he was doing an experiment where he told some people in Nebraska or somewhere in the Midwest to send a letter to Boston, right? And specifically, though, you had to get it to like a financial expert in Boston. So what he found out is that generally what people would do, if that was some random network, like say this telephone lines down here, right? If I need to get the message from here to here, and I'm not really given any instructions or anything like that, I'll just do kind of what's available to me. I'll send it, right? In the case of, okay, well, you need to get this to a banker in Boston as quickly as possible, exchanging hands with the least amount of people as possible. What I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start thinking about, okay, well, who do I know that maybe lives in Boston or knows somebody in Boston? And who do I know that maybe is in the financial world, right? So what I start to think in myself is, okay, well, how do I find in the network of America the best route for me to take, right? And what this really is this characteristic called searchability of a network. It's really me as a node finding out where I'm going to look in the network to pass information along, right?
Right.
So that's kind of the gist of where a small network came. They found on average it took between 5 and 7 people to get from, Nebraska to Boston. And that's where the whole 6 degrees of freedom, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, that kind of concept comes from, right? So let's go a little bit further here. So this is where things start to get pretty cool. So Strotz and Watts and Strogatz, sorry, these two guys, they kind of start doing the initial research on a small network, and they kind of come up with this idea where they say, okay, well, let's say you do have this regular lattice network that's a circle, and let's say we introduce this probability. They call it a rewiring probability, and that rewiring probability itself can go from 0 to 1. As you get closer to 1, it increases the randomness of the connectivity of the nodes in the network. Okay, so you can kind of see in this little diagram here, it characterizes this middle one as a small world just because of these extra added connections in the network. But if P gets to be 1, you can see that you really end up with this random network where if I send a node here, it can access some very random nodes in the network. Whereas before, I'm kind of limited to my neighboring nodes, right? So this is a pretty cool little applet to show you kind of what this looks like. So I have here just the regular lattice network. As I increase the rewiring probability, this is starting to look a little familiar, isn't it?
That looks like Bitcoin, Connor.
It does. It does. And what you actually end up seeing is that you end up with a small, what's called clustering coefficient. So it's actually highly clustered as well. And that's important because that's another characteristic you can use to tell whether a network actually displays small world properties. And I'll spoil it for you, Corey, that Marco Haverone and Dr. Wright did find that you end up with a small clustering coefficient. So this is the small world network at its core, the theory behind it, all that kind of stuff. And kind of what the point that we try to get across here is that you can really extrapolate this P, this rewiring probability itself, as the added incentive to be highly connected in the network, right?
Right.
So that probability goes away. You don't have to introduce this random variable. Really, you can just say, hey, if you're highly connected to every network in the node or every node in the network, you make more money. It's as simple as that, right? So that's all kind of taken away. The probability is taken away. It's now solved by an economic incentive, right? So that's pretty. That's pretty cool, right? I mean, alone, and that's kind of why I talked about. We don't really need to look at Dr. Wright's or Marco Haverone's results because you can kind of extrapolate this just by thinking through it. This probability really just represents the incentive to be highly connected. That's all there is to it. Because if I'm operating with just one connection over here and I find a block, and let's say maybe this guy finds a block, it's really a race to get that block propagated to the rest of the network, right? So for both of us, there's the incentive to, well, I'm going to connect everybody so that I can beat you, Because if I find it a millisecond before you, I'm going to beat you by a millisecond, right?
Right. And I think it's important to highlight too here. The connectivity here is also very valuable. Like selfish mining, double spend attacks. The faster information can get relayed across this whole network, the more durable it is. That's why this is so important that Bitcoin is a small world network and not some other network where it's vulnerable to attack.
Yeah.
If there's more time,
And
if there's more time between node connections, then that leaves just more time for attack.
yep, exactly.
Shorter the time, faster you are, the more secure the network is.
And it's a great segue here, because what you end up learning as you kind of keep going through this book, and you kind of say, okay, well, so the small world network is really where the book's introduced, because a lot of social networks themselves display small world properties, right? Even Facebook. So Facebook itself actually displays very similar properties to this, because on Facebook, actually, it takes the 6 degrees of connectivity, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon or whatever, and actually has decreased it to 4. So now on Facebook, you're about 4 hops away from just about anybody, which is really crazy and almost terrifying, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of first begins saying, hey, a lot of social networks kind of display small world behavior. So what you need to kind of get into is, okay, well, there are 3 characteristics of networks that we really care about. And all small world networks themselves, in the context of social networks, have shortcomings in all 3 of these respects. And Vega Rondano himself kind of outweighs that and shows, well, for certain scenarios that have been studied, maybe search was high, but robustness was low in the network that had a high search, and maybe diffusion was high, but search was low. Things like that. Really, what is the most remarkable aspect of all this is that Bitcoin is very, very strong in all 3 of these characteristics, right? So we can define robustness here. It's basically just the resilience of a network to what we would call occasional perturbations of the network. Basically, what that really means is how easy is it to shut down, right? Whether that's and that's really a broad topic, especially in the context of Bitcoin. But really, in the context of graph theory, you're talking about, if I remove a node from the network, how does that affect the network? What would be a perturbation that we're talking about? Search itself is something we've already kind of talked about, but it's the procedure by which individual nodes may look for, access, and disperse information. And some of these questions that he himself asked in this book is the effectiveness of search influenced by the topology of the network? And the answer to that is absolutely. Like it's undeniable it is, right? Because if we take this Lightning Network topology, and I want to get information that's on the other side of the network, where do I go? Right? I mean, in the case of something like Lightning Network, which I think I put a little image of somewhere around here, maybe I will look here, since that's a very highly connected node, but that doesn't really solve the problem, because if I want to get information from here and I'm over here, I'm still kind of just guessing, right? I'm like, well, I guess I'll start here. Maybe that'll bring me here. But now maybe I'm over here, and I'm like, well, I don't know. Maybe I'll come back here. you see the concept here, right? So
I think too, it kind of speaks on the robustness aspect as well in that little graph that you had there too, because as you can kind of see, there's a couple nodes in there with very high centrality. And if someone were to attack that part of the network, that is going to hurt the robustness of the whole network as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it kind of goes, I guess to kind of layer on top of what you're saying, it's incredible how these 3 aspects kind of fall hand in hand with each other.
Oh, yeah.
When it comes to
And something that we've talked about a little bit, it doesn't even just have to be, and this is something I try to bring up kind of right off the bat with the robustness piece. I guess we'll get in the last one here, diffusion, right? So diffusion would be the phenomena that governs the spread over time of signals in the network, right? So in the case of Bitcoin, obviously that would be, how does a transaction propagate across the network? How do blocks propagate across the network? And things like that, right? Yeah. But something that, we can talk about, broadly here, robustness, right? So I kind of brought it up originally. I lack the legal expertise to know, like, what is capable of being shut down. But let's say you do end up with, I don't know. Here you go. Let's say you end up. Sorry, I'm going to take this. Let's say you end up with, let's say Ethereum. Let's say, just hypothetically, argument's sake, Ethereum itself is the most robust, diffuse, whatever network possible. If the SEC can shut it down, or, the government in general, any kind of government in general can shut it down, is it robust? That would be question number one. And it's something that no one talks about at all. I know we've talked about it a little bit, right? But robustness can extend in cryptocurrency far past just topology of the network, right?
Right.
Bitcoin was clearly designed in a way where it's very, very, very hard to shut it down. And I think we're kind of on the edge of that. I happened to stumble upon on YouTube today this that guy from Cardano or IOHK, Charles Hodgkinson, and he was kind of like talking. I mean, it sounds like he's been kind of talking to regulators and stuff, because I'm sure that they probably might be like a security type thing. But he was like saying Ripple, Ethereum. He even called it Ethereum. All these different things. EOS, obviously. Well, they might get made an example out of, right? So, anyway, we don't have to get too into that. But robustness doesn't just mean network topology, right? It could mean anything that could shut down the network.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you have like a highly central node too, and that gets taken out by legal action, I mean that kind of falls into the robustness aspect of the network topology itself too.
And that's a great point, right? Because that's exactly what I think a lot of people are scared of with Lightning. Because if you have a hub like this, I mean, what happens if that hub gets shut down? What happens if any kind of government says, hey, a nefarious transaction went through this hub, we're shutting down the hub until further notice, right? And you take this hub out, and I'm over here, and I want to get a transaction here. Am I going to be able to do it?
Right. And I think, well, it kind of speaks to, like, is it possible to pull up the small world network right beside that?
Yeah, let's see.
It'd be nice to kind of show. So you have that small world network.
Hey, I'm going to turn my AC off. Sorry, you keep talking.
Okay. All right. So I was going to say you have that small world network where everyone's kind of like on the outside, interconnected with each other. And like, what happens if you remove one of those nodes? I mean, if you remove one of the nodes in the small world network, nothing really happens too much,
Yep.
It's extremely durable. But when you have something like this graph here, with that one blue node that's highly connected with a ton of other nodes, if you remove that one, that's going to hurt the network incredibly.
That's actually a great point. And maybe what we can do here, you actually brought it up here. So Dr. Wright actually went over this in his presentation.
To go down.
Maybe we'll just play this clip.
Coin circle jerk here. This is competition at its finest. When we remove links in Bitcoin, it doesn't go down. Bitcoin Cash with less nodes and fewer miners right now, to stop working, needs to have 980 machines nuked to go down. Not one or two. 980. And there's only 1,000 machines. That means basically you have to nuke Africa, Korea, China, let's say everywhere except Antarctica. I haven't actually seen a node running in Antarctica, so maybe you don't nuke that place. The penguins are happy. That's it. So, what we...
All right. So, anyway. So, I think that's a good point. You can see the kind of graphic that was in there, right? It talks about, okay, well, if I remove a node from the network, how are the links affected, right?
Right.
And the graphic there kind of shows that Bitcoin recovers, right?
It recovers quickly.
Yes, exactly. Well, and more interestingly is that in the case of Bitcoin Cash and BTC today, Bitcoin Cash actually recovers quicker than BTC because of the difficulty adjustment algorithm, which is really interesting because if 900 nodes are nuked off the network on BTC, right, then you might not get a difficulty adjustment for, in some cases, it could be timed or whatever until 2,000 blocks later, right?
Right.
On Bitcoin Cash, that would adjust a lot quicker. So that's kind of what I guess this was all about here. We've kind of covered most of the robustness part, and then obviously, right, liquidity, right? So take away the topology of the network itself. Well, the topology itself of Lightning is determined by liquidity. So, I mean, really, I mean, it's just really aggravating because all you end up with is just the nodes with high liquidity become highly connected, and you just end up with banks, right? Just the same thing we have today. It's just a settlement layer of banks that your transaction is dependent on their liquidity, and yeah, right. So what we say here at the end is, unlike Bitcoin, the Lightning Network introduces nothing innovative when it comes to creating a robust payment network. We can just say robustness. Obviously, Bitcoin wins there. All right. Anything, Corey? Keep going. What do you think?
Yeah. All right. Good. Yeah.
All right. So, search. So, search we've talked about a little bit here, right? In the case of Milgram's experiment, searchability was the concept of like, well, I need to get this from here to here as quickly as possible. I'm going to be selective in who I hand this to, or in a way, the searchability aspect is I'm trying to find a node in the network that best suits me getting this across the network, right? In Bitcoin, you can talk about searchability in a few different ways, right? Because searchability, if I'm like a merchant, right, I want to be able to search the network quickly to find if a transaction is originating from an address that is double spending, right? So, what I find kind of interesting is, obviously, I mentioned this here, Vega Redondo himself actually qualifies he cites searchability as the main characteristic that makes a protocol qualify as decentralized. And this becomes pretty clear, right? Because searchability itself is a function of the number of links between nodes. It really, if I can find something quickly, it's because there's enough links or edges in the network that I don't have to search far to get the information I want, right? So I'm trying to go ahead.
This topic is where I struggle with the most, at least a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So anything in particular, or should I just kind of walk through it?
I guess like more of the information that miners take in about other miners to know that searchability is like qualitative,
Sure. Yeah. I think
I get the fact that they kind of I know that they communicate with each other, but like the nodes themselves, like through the network, they communicate with each other, like block propagation, transactions, and everything. But it's kind of crazy. Like to me, I always think of like a small world network as a person. You know, like how do I necessarily know that this person is trustworthy. Like if I just met them, if I just hopped in the network, you know.
Sure. Yeah. And I think like for a miner, that trustworthiness probably comes with, or I guess however you want to characterize that would be, well, has this node produced a block, right? So, as a miner, I know who is a miner because, okay, have you broadcast a block to me? Did a block originate from your node, right? So in that respect, they can kind of start to parse out who is who and you know, who is more important, I guess, than the other nodes in the network. So really, in the case of if I were to spin up like an XT node right now, there's not going to be any miners reaching out to my node, right, to connect to me. But with that said, if I start broadcasting a ton of transactions, right, so maybe if like 1,000 transactions a day are originating from myself, then obviously there's an incentive for both myself and the miner to be highly connected with myself, right?
Right.
And we should plug real quick. I want to plug this. I don't know if you watched this today. I think it came out yesterday. Ryan Charles is doing a daily vlog for the Money Button, because the Money Button is supposed to launch August 20th. He's doing a daily vlog for the Money Button, and the first one was about zero confirmation. And what he talks about, I'll take this away for now, but what he talks about is the Money Button themselves is going to run a node across the globe from their servers today. Okay? And that node itself will be monitoring with a minimum relay of 0 Satoshi per bytes. So, I mean, they're going to be taking in everything, right? All the dust, everything. They're going to be a very highly connected node on the other side of the globe of where their server is. And it's going to monitor for double spends. Isn't that interesting?
That is pretty interesting.
Because all we've been talking about this entire time, a lot of people on the internet have been talking about this entire time, when talking about zero confirmation is safe, double spends are very hard, all this other stuff, is that there's incentives across the board to mitigate the risk. And the risk itself is vastly, vastly smaller than a credit card payment. That's really the root of the argument, right? The Money Button is going to run a node on the other side of the globe that's highly connected to monitor for double spends. And what that does is it takes the minuscule amount of risk that zero confirmation has and makes it even smaller to a degree of like, wow, like this is extremely secure almost, because hey, if you double spend, I'm not taking the transaction. I'm denying the transaction. That's all there is to it, right?
Right.
So I highly recommend everyone watch that video, because I mean that's a business in action doing all this stuff that everyone says, well, it's just theoretical and whatever else. And so kudos to Ryan. Want to give that a shout out. And the Money Button, it's gonna be sweet. Maybe we'll talk to him soon. So all right, get back to it. Searchability. Let you see my screen again, Corey. All right, so trying to remember exactly where I went with this. So this got a little confusing, I think, even for myself. I had to delete a lot of it. It's one of those things, like, you know, there's the quote of, like, if you can't explain it in simple terms, you probably don't fully understand it. I kind of got that a little bit as I was writing this. So it's very clear that a lot of the math involved here went a little bit over my head. But I think the concept itself became clear, and so I try to condense the concepts to something a little bit more understandable. And Corey, you can be the judge of whether that's true by the end of this here. But basically, the idea here that I wanted to get across is okay. So if you have a one-dimensional lattice network, similar to that cul-de-sac we were talking about earlier, right? Basically, the idea here being, if I'm a node over here and I want to find information over here, the search delay is what we can call it, right? Grows as this network increases in size. The further away that node gets, the longer it's going to take for me to find the information that's over there, right?
Right.
So what we can say generally is that the search delay of a network like this grows linearly as the network grows in size. So just a very simple graph down here. This would show what a linear a function looks like, right? So as the network grows in size, that search delay is growing lock in step with it, right? Now, what's really interesting is that if you take this configuration and you make it multi-dimensional, right? So something like, maybe I can get a diagram here. That might help out. Let me just do that real quick. That'll help us out. So something like this, I guess. This will work. Maybe. So a multi-dimensional lattice network. I guess this will work. I mean, this is the concept, right? So not only do I have the degrees of freedom here in the network, but I can go up here, right? Or maybe even up here. So the degrees of freedom involved increase. Essentially is the point we're trying to get across, right? I'm not just looking this way, but maybe I can go up here. I can think of it like maybe this turned into like a cube of nodes, okay? Now, that doesn't have to make any sense to you, and this is where I got kind of stuck, is trying to get that through. So I said, okay, let's forget about it. Just, if you care about the mathematics, go read the book, okay? I'm not going to be able to explain the mathematics to you. But what they found out was that in a multi-dimensional lattice network, the search delay actually grows smaller than logarithmically as the network increases in size. So you can see, just as a generic comparison in this graph, assuming you know nothing about mathematics at all, well, yeah, obviously, okay, well, if I introduce this quote-unquote multi-dimensional aspect of the network, the search delay actually grows very slowly as the network increases in size, right? Yeah. So that's pretty interesting. And that the proof is all in the book. If you care to fact check it, you can take it up with Vega Rondando, okay? Not with me. So it kind of talks about that a lot here, but what I kind of found out was, okay, well let's move a little bit further. Because when you find out, okay, so Watson, Stragas, these guys who initially did the small world experiment, or the research, I guess, on a small world network, what they found out is that, okay, well, in real social networks, searchability is high because people themselves tend to organize their perception of the world in a hierarchical fashion. So, in general, individuals would assign a hierarchy to the nodes in a network. So if you could take maybe the original Milgram experiment, right? I would place, if I'm someone in Nebraska and I need to, okay, well, I have this task of getting this letter to Boston in as few steps as possible, I would end up creating a general hierarchy of, okay, well, I have just my regular friends who have no affiliation with finance or Boston, right? They may be at the bottom rung of the ladder. But maybe higher up would be, okay, well, I know someone who has a relative in Boston. Higher up would be, I have a friend in Boston, right? Higher up in that would be, I have a friend in Boston that works in finance, right? So kind of the concept they're talking about is, well, I can start grouping nodes in the network in a hierarchical fashion. I can say, well, this one is probably more important to the goal that I'm trying to accomplish than these other nodes, right? So does that make sense, I guess, before I keep moving around?
Right. Like, the more variables you have in like a model, the more information you have about like what the output might be.
Yeah.
Basically, the more information that you have, the more degrees of information that you have, the better the model is.
The degrees are really the key, right? You have a little bit more freedom to choose where you're gonna look or where you're gonna go, right?
Right.
So, very simply, you can kind of take Bitcoin nodes and do this, right? You can put miners at the top of the rung because obviously miners are the most highly connected. They're really the only nodes that matter, the only nodes that produce blocks. So users and merchants can mess around with anything they want. You really don't accomplish anything until miners get wind of it, right? So in a very general sense, you can kind of create a hierarchy for Bitcoin. And obviously miners would be at the top, merchants I would put right below them, and then just generally I put users below them. Now, is this an accurate depiction of Bitcoin? No, right? There's obviously going to be merchants that are closer to miners, less closer to miners, things like that, right? So it's definitely a spectrum, but on a high level, you can say, well, we now have this quote-unquote three-dimensional network. There are 3 dimensions to this network that exist. Again, don't think about that too hard. Just if you take it mathematically and you kind of think of this as like a multi-dimensional hierarchical network, you can see that the search delay grows. You can say that we tend towards this logarithmic growth instead of the linear growth. That's all that matters, right? So the network can get as large as you want. The search ability of the network is not impacted as much by the network growth as it would be if it were this one-dimensional network. That's all that we really want to get across here, okay?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, in the case of searchability, right, all these different hierarchical groups will behave differently. So obviously merchants, as we've kind of talked about, I want to make sure that double spend attempts aren't occurring. So if I want to search the network, I'm going to search out all of the mining nodes in the network. If I'm the money button, right, I'm going to search out the miners in the network to make sure double spends aren't being broadcast to miners. I don't actually care about what Connor's XT node is doing, right? There's no point. So the searchability here comes in the fact of, again, economic incentives of I'm the money button. I want to prevent double spends from being accepted in my platform. I'm going to be highly connected to miners, right? And I'm going to search those mining nodes for transactions.
Right.
And then in the case of users, right? I mean, really that's the gist of the concept here, where miners themselves, they're searching other miners. They really don't need to search out merchants because merchants are the ones that are incentivized to search out them. But really, the concept we're trying to get across here is that searchability is solved in this network via the hierarchy. And that's what Watts and Strauch has found, is that in social networks, the only way searchability could be high is if hierarchical, I'll use the word dimensions, but really groups form, right?
Right.
Yeah. Does that make sense? Does that kind of make sense?
But yeah.
Okay.
It's sense. But that's like, for me, I don't know, the main thing that I pull away, it takes time for something like this to evolve, you know? This searchability, because there's so much information being relayed that it kind of takes time for nodes to learn about each other.
Mm-hmm.
That it's, which I think also just kind of goes to show how Bitcoin has evolved substantially in the past 9 years. You know, this stuff takes time, but the fact that we're at a point where we are right now, pretty impressive. And it's still evolving too, which I think is the craziest part.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And it'll be even more interesting to see how it continues to evolve with. And I kind of put this very briefly. I was struggling whether to leave it out, but I mean things like Terranode, right, which is really a fulfillment of something that Gavin Andreessen was pushing for a long time. Of let's start to break apart the node software. Because if I'm a merchant, I don't need to have the mining piece of the software, right? I mean, there's really no point in you running full mining software, and kind of we point out here, SPV does not exist the way it's outlined in the white paper yet. It still doesn't. We really have getting a weird phone call. I'm going to turn that off. But anyway, so like you said, it'll be very interesting to see how this evolves, right?
Right. All
right, so we're almost there. Diffusion, though, is something very, very interesting. And it's something I still am probably going to continue to learn about. But I will say it did kind of blow my mind. It was hard to keep kind of blowing my mind, but I got through the book and then it gets to diffusion itself in the book, and it specifically mentions the SIR model of epidemiology. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's why Dr. Wright brings it up all the time, I guess. But really, the book itself goes specifically into how social networks themselves very closely resemble epidemic diffusion. In the case of, so an SIR model would just be susceptibility, infection, and recovery. So in the at a very high level in a biological system, if a virus is spreading, right, and let's say there's 5 people, and let's say one person is infected. Let's just start out. One person is infected, 4 people are not. Those 4 people would be in the susceptible state, and then maybe as that virus spreads between people, they would then become in the infective state until finally the virus would pass through them, right? And then they would be in the recovery state. So that's a very simple characteristic of what the SIR model of epidemiology is. And really the point we should really get across is that that's just, social networks very closely model that kind of stuff, especially small networks. And so, again, Vega Redondo cites the number of edges in the network as the key to seeing SIR diffusion. So the higher the connectivity of the network is, the closer we start to resemble that SIR epidemic model. So what's very spare.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's almost like evolution, like natural selection, right?
Yeah.
Just in terms of like a higher level kind of.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Because I'm trying to break it down more at like a simpler level. It's pretty much evolution,
Well, and isn't it kind of like not creepy, but it's just very interesting that how the network itself is so innovative, but now you get to like, okay, well, everything that propagates across the network very closely resembles biological systems. Doesn't this graphic here pretty closely resemble a petri dish? And how maybe things in a petri dish spread?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's I think
we might want to cool it down before we get too deep. I don't know. How much beer did you go there?
I'm still on 1, so we're all right.
Yeah, but it is crazy to think about, though. I don't know.
Yeah.
Definitely nuts.
We'll go further with that maybe someday. But
yeah, we'll have another episode, maybe a 5-hour episode. Finish the tag next time.
Oh man. So all right, so yeah, Dr. Wright himself actually, he's the one who's really been modeling this stuff. He goes, well, this really resembles the SERIC model of epidemiology, which kind of breaks down into, it's very similar to the SIR model, but you have susceptible, exposed, infection, recovery, and then carrier. Okay. Now, of course, I kind of just very briefly kind of go back over economic incentives are, again, how this propagation is happening. We've kind of already gone over the incentive to be highly connected. The incentive, of course, then to propagate quickly. So if you're a merchant and you receive a transaction, you want to make sure your transaction is first seen by the network. So you're going to propagate that very rapidly, right? That's very straightforward as a merchant. That incentive is there to propagate quickly. In the case of a miner, it's really the same thing. If you find a block, again, you're incentivized to propagate that as rapidly as possible to as many people as possible. So it it really frustrates me when you see the whole, economic incentives is like a cult thing. It's like, no, it's very clear how this stuff is working and how it creates this innovative network, right? So I just kind of broke down, well, okay, what are all these states in the Bitcoin network? It's susceptible, obviously, if I'm a miner, I'm waiting until either I find a block or a block is sent to me, right? I'm really in that susceptible state of, I want to make sure I'm highly connected so that if I do see a new block propagated, I'm going to start building on top of that as quick. I'm going to validate it and then go right on top of it as quickly as possible, right? The same could be said of transactions, right? If a transaction reaches me, I'll spend the time saying, am I going to include it in my mempool? Yes or no? And move forward. So that exposed state is really, all right, is this valid, right? Am I going to mine in this block? Is this transaction valid? That exposed state is very brief, obviously, but I'm saying, okay, is this valid? Is this not valid? If it's not valid, maybe I'm going to orphan it and go back to the susceptible state, right? But let's say I say, okay, yep, it's a valid block. Boom, I'm now infected, right? So I'm infected. I'm saying, all right, this block is valid. I'm immediately going to begin mining on top of this block. Okay, that infection is valid. Whatever you want to say there. I'm mining right on top of it, and boom, recovery. I'm now recovered back to the susceptible state, right? So the SCIR piece, pretty simple. I was like, well, where did the C come into play? And it became, carrier. Carrier node refers to all these Raspberry Pis that we're told to care about, right? Because a carrier node does nothing but carries the virus. It doesn't actually infect. It doesn't actually do anything. It just carries the virus. So really, in the case of my XT node, I'm just a carrier of the blockchain. That's all I am, right? The infection, the exposing and the infection, the recovery, that all happens on its own. I'm just carrying the results of what happens, right? So then you end up with the right there, the SCIRC model of Bitcoin. Super fascinating, right? I mean, that's diffusion of the network right there. That's just how the network diffuses quickly. So, and this is, again, isn't really an original thought on my end, but what becomes pretty obvious is that you're really looking at one of the first biologically inspired networks that we've really been able to witness. So, because this is really more so than anything theoretically come up with in the SIR scenarios of small world networks, right? So, anyway.
Spooky stuff. Spooky stuff.
I know. It's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
So we can kind of run through the rest of this stuff here, but if you really take all this together, right, and it's something we talked about at the beginning. Well, actually, before I know we're pushing time here, but I also want to play this graphic.
Right now?
We're at 106, so we're almost there. But well, we should play this graphic too. Again, another N-chain graphic, but what you end up looking at here is you're going to start seeing, okay, well, you have the small world network in play that we've been talking about. It's a near complete graph in practice. So these are all the miner nodes, right? Very highly connected. Some user nodes maybe going to connect on the outside. So maybe they're going to connect to a few merchants here. Everything that we've been talking about is how this works. So I'm a user. I'm going to say, all right, broadcast to the miners, right? I'm going to broadcast to 4 miners instantaneously. Boom. The rest of the network has the transaction, right? Mm-hmm. And really the distance of Bitcoin is like 1.32. It's something insane. Small network distance. So really then I guess this actually goes through, okay, well, what happens if we remove a node from the network, right? So this has actually been good to bring up earlier, but we're going to let this play a little bit. Give it a second. Oh, is that the end? Bummer. All right. Whatever. You kind of get the point here, right? So if I were to move a miner here, the network still operates and without a hitch. So that's the network in action, and we'll move on to decentralization. Something we started talking about at the beginning here. We'll kind of breeze through this quickly. So again, the Lightning Network or the I don't know what to call them anymore. You can't call them Bitcoin anymore. It's just impossible with a straight face to call them Bitcoin anymore after talking about stuff like this. So the BTCers, right, they say everyone needs to run a node. The more nodes we have, the more decentralized Bitcoin is, and the better it is. It is the dumbest thing ever. When you really start to look into this, you start to break it down. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So I took this with a pretty simple kind of example, right? Because if you're going to talk about decentralization, to me, and Corey, you can correct me if I'm wrong, decentralization would be, I want information. If I'm going to interact with this network, information should be able to spread to as many people in the network as possible, right? That to me would be a characteristic of a decentralized network, right? Mm-hmm. So I took the kind of the extreme example of, well, let's assume you're like some kind of crazy journalist, right? And let's say you get some crazy sensitive documents handed to you that either a government or a very powerful company or someone very powerful says, I do not want this to get out. And they have a lot of money, they have a lot of computing power, and they're ready to start preventing you from getting this out. Okay? I kind of lay out these three scenarios, right? So in the case of Twitter, right, since we kind of started the whole piece talking about Twitter, maybe you spread the documents to as many people as you can, but what you really want to make sure is, I want to make sure that the documents themselves can be verified to not have been tampered with. I was going to say you can spread the documents in Bitcoin, and like if you were way back when in the Bitcoin days, you had 4 gigs of op return data, so you could do it, but I'm going to say let's just argue that op return is not that large, so you can only publish a hash to the network, okay?
Okay.
Twitter, you publish a hash on Twitter, okay? That would be scenario number 1. Scenario number 2, and I gave the qualification that you only had $20 of Bitcoin in your wallet. Okay, now I thought some people were going to take me to task on that, but no one did. But I was like, I think that's like, let's just assume worst case scenario, something happens, you only have $20 of Bitcoin. Okay.
Okay.
You can't afford an on-chain transaction because Adam Back's dream is fulfilled, and $100 transaction fees are the minimum. Gregory Maxwell's popping champagne, right? So you can't actually afford the on-chain transaction, okay?
Yeah.
So you instead publish a hash of documents in the Lightning Network because you're like, well, I'm going to use this super decentralized network where everyone's running their Lightning nodes and Raspberry Pis, so of course everyone's going to be able to get it and I'm going to be good, right? So that would be scenario number 2. You publish the hash to the Lightning Network. Now, solution number 3, you publish it to the centralized evil mining cartel of Bitcoin Cash, okay, into op return, and you spend less than a penny to do so. So let's see what happens in each scenario, right? The general concept here is, okay, well, Twitter obviously introduces a central point of failure. Maybe people take a screenshot of the hash, but I mean, really, as soon as Twitter takes it down, there's no way to verify that it was a real tweet unless someone grabbed an archived copy of it. But even then, as we found, archive sites are not secure, or they're not really. You can mess with them, and people like Dr. Wright has clearly done that. Okay, so step number 2, you make a Lightning Network transaction. Now you're talking about, of course, the people that you're trying to get this information out about have a lot of computing power and they have a lot of money. So in the case of Lightning Network, they very trivially DDoS the nodes off the network because you're really not. DDoSing a node isn't that difficult, right? And so let's say they take the 5 most well-connected hubs off the network. Maybe your transaction actually only made it broadcast to 100 Lightning Network nodes. And what's worse, there's no record of that transaction in any kind of mutable ledger. So there's actually no proof that the transaction ever occurred. And your transaction only spread to 100 nodes, and that's it. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Or number 3, everything that we've just talked about is taken into effect, and any user at all connected to mining nodes across the network see your transaction immediately. It is written in to the immutable Bitcoin ledger for history, and all the computing power in the globe, I was generous and said take 70% of the network down. It would probably be way less than that anyway. Sorry. I'm being hyperbolic. All the computing power that is available to this resource, right, would barely take any time or percent of the network down. The miners would continue to produce blocks, maybe a little bit slower in the short term. But then, boom, your hash is embedded in the Bitcoin blockchain for the entirety of history. Everyone can now forever verify that it exists. Which one of those 3 scenarios sounds more decentralized to you, Corey?
Bitcoin Cash one.
Bitcoin, son. Bitcoin.
Yeah, Bitcoin. BCH. Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where I think a lot of people get confused about decentralization in terms of like number of node count. like people think of decentralization in terms of like maybe how sporadic something is, or like the spread of it, you know. But they don't think about the time of it, you know. Yep. So like if I can, like what is centralized pretty much is that you have to go through some central party to get information to someone else, and that requires that central party, and that requires time as well. Now, if I can communicate to other highly connected nodes that's where decentralization comes into effect, when I can communicate with multiple people and have that message be broadcasted. Besides, like, if one person that I'm connected to doesn't want to do that, it's decentralized because of those other people are going to relay that information.
Right.
And that one person that didn't, it doesn't matter whether they did. That's where decentralization, the strength of decentralization comes into play.
Yep. Yeah.
So.
And to make this very clear, the decentralization comes into play because of the number of edges in the network, not the number of nodes. Very clear that that's the case, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. How you can communicate with other people by the edges. Yeah.
So the next person that says Bitcoin BCH is a centralized shitcoin has no idea what they're talking about, and that's that's done. It's not even up for debate at this point.
Yeah, and I think going back to like how you're communicating just transaction or a message, a relay, and through a centralized and decentralized aspect. When we're talking about Raspberry Pis aren't spreading your information anyway. They're only listening to it, you know?
Yep.
So when it comes to decentralization and you have a bunch of people that aren't spreading information, that in a way is kind of like, it hits a roadblock, you know? And
yep.
That's where it all goes downhill from there.
Exactly, man.
But
so that's it. That's what we got. But
my Raspberry Pi. I mean, Raspberry Pis are pretty good. Like
they're fun. Yeah.
Eat. But not that productive. But yeah, that was a dense episode. Sure.
Yeah.
Props to you though for doing all that work.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
But I'm about to get into that book myself here and get through it a little bit. We'll see. See if I get some of the math. Get through the math.
It's tough.
Yeah.
It's good reading though.
Yeah.
But so that's
right.
Anything else we wanted to cover? But I don't know. I got nothing.
I don't know if anyone has any questions. I mean, I don't know. Feel free to reach out to us. You know,
yeah.
We love talking about this stuff.
So we have our website, right? thebchboys.com. We'll go ahead and plug Purse. You can go to our website, get $20 back on your first Purse purchase if you go there. Twitter, the BCH Boys. And then we'll post some links, I guess, down here. So we'll post a link to the book. I guess everything else that we covered here. We'll try and get some links on YouTube. I think what I'm trying to do too is get all of our episodes up on YouTube. Since like all the audio ones that we had.
Like in season 1.
Yeah. It might be worth putting them up just so people can see them all in one. But yeah. So yeah, thanks for watching, listening, and Wednesday night we got a good interview coming up. And Corey, we'll tweet out your information for tomorrow for people.
Oh yeah. Yep. Well, tomorrow or tonight when you're listening to this.
Yeah.
July 10th.
Oh, and also I'll be in New York soon, just so you know. I gotta talk about that. But
okay.
I got a trip booked. Yeah. So let's talk about that.
Alright, cool.
Cool. I'm gonna stop it. Have a good one.
Alright,